I thought it was going to be a normal summer, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The warm golden light of the setting sun painted the house in soft, amber hues. It should have been peaceful. The kind of evening where you could relax, let go of all the stress, and enjoy the calm. But that evening, the air felt thick, charged, like a storm was brewing on the horizon. And little did I know, I was about to walk right into the heart of it. Sam and I had always been close. We were practically inseparable when we were younger. Summers spent exploring the woods, playing games in the backyard, and just talking about life. No matter what else was going on in our lives, we always knew we could count on each other. But something was different this time. There was a shift, barely noticeable at first, but it grew over the past few days. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt it in the way he looked at me, in the tension that seemed to hang between us when we spoke. It was like the familiarity we once shared was slipping away. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was just overthinking things. But when I entered his room that afternoon, everything changed. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound cutting through the silence. I expected to find him playing his guitar, maybe reading something, or just hanging out like he usually did. Instead, I froze. The scene before me was something I could never have predicted. Sam was sitting there, not alone, but with someone else. A stranger. They were so caught up in each other, so unaware of my presence, that they didn't even notice when I stood there in shock. It wasn't what I expected. I should have turned around, walked away, pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my heart pounding in my chest. What was happening? What was going on between them? And why was I suddenly feeling like I was on the edge of something I wasn't ready for? I couldn't even begin to make sense of it. It was as though the world around me had gone still, frozen in time. My mind raced, my thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and disbelief. What should I do now? What had I just walked into? The house had always been a second home to me, a place where I could escape the everyday rush and lose myself in the comfort of familiar surroundings. Sam's family cabin, nestled in the quiet countryside, was where I spent most of my childhood summers. I knew every corner of that house, every creaking floorboard, every smell in the air. The place had a kind of magic to it, a timeless quality that made everything feel simple and carefree. The scent of pine from the trees outside mingled with the faint smell of wood smoke from the fireplace. The sound of crickets chirping in the distance was like a lullaby, helping me relax, helping me forget the world outside. But this year, something felt different. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed almost suffocating. Maybe it was just the heat of the summer, the oppressive humidity that made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. Or maybe it was the sense that Sam and I were no longer the same people we used to be. We had always been close, best friends, cousins, confidants, but recently there was an unspoken distance between us. I noticed it in the way he looked at me sometimes, with an intensity that I couldn't explain. His smile, once so familiar, now felt like it carried an unknown weight. It made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't pinpoint why. That afternoon, I found myself wandering through the house, trying to push away the nagging feeling that something was off. The house felt too quiet. Sam was always around, always doing something, whether it was working on one of his many projects or just hanging out in his room. But today, he was nowhere to be found. His parents were out, and I was left alone in the house, which only made the silence feel heavier. The house, once filled with laughter and chatter, now felt empty. The familiar scent of his mother's cooking didn't fill the air. There was no sound of his father's laughter from the living room. It was just me. And the silence that seemed to swallow everything. I wandered from room to room, hoping to find him, but I was only met with the same eerie stillness. The house felt almost abandoned, even though I knew it wasn't. It was as though something invisible was lurking just beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite grasp but felt with every step I took. As I walked past his bedroom door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether I should go in. Sam had always been private about his space, but we had spent countless hours hanging out in his room, so it wasn't unusual for me to walk in without knocking. But today, it felt different. Something about that door, just barely open, seemed like an invitation, or a warning. I pushed it open slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The soft creak of the door echoed in the quiet, and my heart began to race. I didn't know why, but something in the back of my mind told me I was about to witness something I wasn't prepared for. I tried to shake off the feeling, but as I stepped into the room, it only grew stronger. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. Sam's desk was cluttered with papers, books, and his guitar, just as I expected. The familiar scent of his cologne lingered in the air, and his clothes were scattered across the floor. But that's when I saw him. Sam. And the stranger. They were sitting close together on the bed, their faces inches apart, lost in their own world. The sight shocked me, paralyzing me in place. Sam's usual laid-back demeanor was gone. His eyes were focused, intense, as if he was completely absorbed in the moment. The stranger beside him was just as absorbed, their connection undeniable. For a moment, I stood there, frozen. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It wasn't like anything I had ever expected. Sam had always been private, but this was something different. Something far more intimate than I had ever imagined. It felt as though time had stopped. I wanted to look away to give them privacy, but I couldn't move. My body refused to cooperate. I didn't know what to do, what to think. All I knew was that I had just walked into something that changed everything. The room, which had always felt like a safe space, now felt alien, as though I was intruding on a secret I wasn't supposed to know. And the worst part? I didn't know how to leave. The days that followed were a blur, each one passing by in a haze of confusion and mounting unease. The incident in Sam's room haunted me, but I couldn't bring myself to confront it. Confronting him would mean acknowledging what I had seen, and part of me still didn't want to believe it was real. Maybe I had imagined it, maybe I had misread the situation. But deep down, I knew what I had seen wasn't something I could easily shake off. I kept replaying that moment over and over in my mind, unable to forget the way Sam had looked, the way the stranger had touched him. The weight of it pressed down on me, leaving me feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I tried to keep my distance. I told myself I was giving Sam space, letting him have his privacy. But every time I saw him, every time he looked at me with those eyes that seemed to say so much without a single word, my chest tightened. It was like there was an invisible wall between us, one that neither of us was acknowledging, but we both could feel. And that wall only grew thicker as the days wore on. Sam seemed different. He didn't speak to me as much as he used to. When he did, his voice had an unfamiliar edge, one that made me question everything. His smile no longer felt warm and friendly. It was distant, almost like he was hiding something from me. His behavior was erratic. One moment he was the Sam I knew, the next he was withdrawn and distant, lost in his thoughts. I couldn't figure out what was happening to him, but I could feel the change. It was like he was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. There were moments when I thought he was trying to say something, trying to break the silence that had grown between us. But every time he opened his mouth, the words would get stuck, and he would quickly shut down. It was frustrating, but it also made me feel like I was the one who was doing something wrong. Was it my fault? Had I done something to make him uncomfortable? Maybe he had regretted what had happened, regretted me seeing him in that moment. But then why did he still look at me the way he did? Why did he seem so torn, so conflicted? One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. I could hear Sam moving around upstairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, as if he was trying to make his presence known. A few minutes later, I heard the faint creak of his bedroom door opening. My heart skipped a beat. I knew he wasn't coming down to talk to me. He never did that anymore. I tried to focus on the pages of my book, but my mind kept drifting back to the moment in his room. The way they had looked at each other, the tension that hung in the air. It felt like I had stepped into a different world, one that I didn't belong to. But that didn't stop the questions from swirling in my mind. What had happened between them? Why was Sam acting this way? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do about it? I heard the soft sound of footsteps on the stairs, and for a brief moment, I hoped it was Sam coming to talk, to explain things. But when the doorbell rang, I froze. Who could it be? It wasn't like Sam to have guests over without telling me, especially not when he had been so distant. I went to the door, my curiosity gnawing at me. When I opened it, I was taken aback. The stranger. The one I had seen with Sam. He stood there, looking nervous, as if he wasn't sure what to say or how to act. I wasn't sure whether I should let him in, but something in his expression made me hesitate. He looked almost apologetic. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "Is Sam here?" I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him to leave and never come back. But another part of me, one I couldn't quite understand, wanted to let him in to get answers, to figure out what was going on. But I just stood there, unable to speak. "He's upstairs," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's been busy." The stranger nodded, looking uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing around like he didn't belong here. "I should probably go, but, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his tone uncertain. I should have said no. I should have closed the door and walked away, but the tension between us, the strange pull I felt towards him, kept me rooted to the spot. I found myself nodding, stepping aside to let him in. As soon as he entered, the air felt heavier. I could feel the space between us narrowing, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Why was he here? What did he want? "I know this is weird," he started, his eyes avoiding mine. I wanted to talk to you. About Sam. About everything that's been going on." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything that's been going on? What did he mean by that? What was happening with Sam? My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow as I waited for him to continue. But before he could say anything more, a loud noise came from upstairs, a crash, followed by a muffled shout. I didn't hesitate. I bolted up the stairs, the stranger right behind me. The door to Sam's room was wide open, and inside, Sam was standing by his desk, his face pale and stricken with panic. The room was in disarray, as though a fight had just broken out. Papers were scattered across the floor, the guitar lying abandoned in the corner. Sam's eyes were wide with fear as he looked at the stranger, as if he was caught between two worlds. "What's going on?" I demanded, stepping into the room. But the questions seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. The tension that had been simmering between us finally reached its breaking point in that moment. Sam's eyes darted nervously between the stranger and me, his face flushed with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Fear, guilt, maybe both. I could feel the air in the room grow heavier, the silence between us louder than any words. For a moment, it felt like everything was suspended in time, and I wasn't sure what to do or where to look. The stranger who had followed me upstairs seemed equally uncertain, standing just behind me in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably as if he didn't know if he was intruding or not. His voice broke the silence, sounding strained, almost as if he was trying to keep calm. "Sam," he said softly, almost pleading. "I didn't want this to happen. I never meant for things to go this far." I froze, processing his words. My mind raced to put them together. What was he talking about? What was going on between them? I could see Sam's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw set as if he was holding back something. A confession, an explanation, or maybe a denial. I couldn't tell, but it was clear that whatever had been going on, whatever had led to this confrontation, was about to come out. I didn't ask for this," Sam mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. He finally turned to face me, his eyes full of something I hadn't expected to see, regret. "I didn't want you to find out like this. But I couldn't hide it anymore." I felt the floor drop out from under me, the weight of his words pressing down on me. My throat tightened, and I struggled to keep my composure. What did he mean by that? What was it that I had unknowingly walked into? The room was suffocating, the silence deafening, and the questions in my mind multiplied faster than I could process them. "I don't understand," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "What's going on, Sam? What's all of this? What is he talking about?" Sam opened his mouth to speak but faltered, his gaze falling to the floor. He seemed torn between two forces, wanting to tell the truth but unsure if he should, wanting to protect me from the mess he had gotten himself into but knowing that wasn't possible anymore. His hesitation was more suffocating than any answer he could have given. Before I could press him further, the stranger stepped forward, his expression determined but cautious. "Look, I know this is a lot to take in. But Sam's not the only one involved here. I'm not the only one who's been hiding things." That last sentence hit me harder than I expected, like a sharp, unexpected jab to the stomach. "There was more?" This wasn't just about Sam and his secret. A mix of dread and anticipation surged through me, making it difficult to breathe. I had to know more, had to understand what was really happening in this house, in this moment. I didn't mean for it to spiral like this, the stranger continued, his voice shaking slightly as if he, too, was burdened by the weight of his confession. But when Sam started feeling the way he did, things got complicated. We both got tangled in something we couldn't control. And I think you need to know that, for the sake of everything. The stranger's words hung in the air, and I felt a pit form in my stomach. I wanted to scream, to demand every detail, but a part of me was frozen in place, unsure if I was ready for what was coming next. This wasn't just about a hidden secret anymore. It was about betrayal, guilt, and all the things left unsaid. The tension in the room became unbearable, as if we were standing on the edge of something dark and uncontrollable. Sam's voice broke through the tension again, but this time it was softer, more fragile. "I couldn't tell you," he whispered, almost to himself. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to hate me." At that moment, everything inside me seemed to crumble, the walls I had built around my emotions beginning to crack. I had always seen Sam as my closest friend, someone I could rely on. But now, it felt like I didn't know who he was anymore. The person I thought I knew, the person I trusted, seemed so far removed from the person standing in front of me. I took a step back, my heart racing as the gravity of the situation hit me all at once.
"Sam, what do you mean?"
"What is it that I don't know?" I demanded, my voice rising with a mix of confusion and frustration. I needed the truth. I needed to understand why everything felt so wrong. Sam glanced at the stranger for a long moment, and then his gaze met mine, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. It was in that moment that I realized, whatever was happening, whatever had happened between them, was bigger than I could have imagined. There were no easy answers here. Before Sam could respond, the stranger stepped forward again, his eyes locking with mine. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low but clear. "I know this is hard, but Sam didn't know how to handle it. Neither of us did. But now we can't go back." Everything inside me stilled as the full weight of his words hit me. This wasn't just about a secret. It was about emotions, entanglements, and feelings that neither Sam nor the stranger had been prepared for. It was about a bond between them, something I had never even suspected. And then it happened, something I didn't expect. Sam, his hands shaking, stepped closer to me, his face a mixture of fear and vulnerability. He reached out, grabbing my wrist gently but urgently, his grip tighter than I thought he could manage. "Please," he said, his voice breaking, "you need to understand. I didn't mean to drag you into this. I didn't mean for you to see any of it." The room seemed to close in around me, the world tilting as I tried to process what was happening. I felt my chest tighten, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Sam was reaching out to me, desperate for me to understand, but I wasn't sure if I could. What had he been hiding? What was the truth that he was so afraid to tell me? Before I could say anything, there was a sudden noise, another crash from upstairs. The sound of something breaking, something being thrown against the wall. Sam looked at me, his eyes wide with panic.
"It's him," he whispered.
"It's not just me. We're all caught up in this, and I don't know how to fix it." I had no time to process his words. Without thinking, I turned toward the source of the noise, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room felt charged, as if something was about to explode. The unknown, the secrets, the tension, all of it had led to this moment. And I knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The days after that confrontation were a blur, each one blending into the next with no clear distinction. I couldn't shake the images of that moment. Sam's tear-streaked face, the look in his eyes, the words that seemed to hang in the air between us, unspoken but heavy. The house felt different, colder, despite the same familiar walls and rooms. There was no escaping the tension that lingered, thick and suffocating, like an invisible force that wrapped itself around everything. The truth I had discovered about Sam, about the secret he had been carrying, was more than I could handle. I kept telling myself I should be angry, that I should confront him, demand answers for everything he had hidden. But instead, I found myself distant, both from him and from myself. My thoughts were a mess, and no matter how much I tried to piece them together, I kept coming back to the same question: why hadn't he told me sooner? It wasn't just about the secret anymore. It was about the trust that had been shattered, the bond that had been broken between us. Sam had always been my closest friend, my family. We shared everything, from silly childhood memories to the more serious, life-altering moments. But this felt different. He had betrayed that trust in a way I wasn't sure how to mend. I wanted to understand, wanted to reach out, but every time I looked at him, I was reminded of the unknowns that still lingered between us. I couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of those unanswered questions. His silence, his avoidance, only made everything worse. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to explain, to make things right, but every time he tried, I pushed him away. It was as if a wall had been built between us, and no amount of words could tear it down. I kept asking myself, what had I walked in on that night? And even more troubling, what had I missed? The stranger, who I now knew had been involved with Sam in ways I never imagined, kept to himself, only adding to the confusion. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way his words had hung in the air, full of regret and desperation. He was a part of this, a piece of the puzzle I hadn't quite figured out yet. His actions, the way he looked at Sam, made me question everything I thought I knew about their relationship. It wasn't just about Sam anymore. It was about me, about my place in all of this. Was I just a bystander? Was I really a part of their world, or had I been too blind to see the cracks that were there all along? The guilt I felt, the responsibility I carried, did I have any right to feel that way? I couldn't help but wonder if I should have noticed sooner, if I could have done something to stop it before it all came to this. It was late one evening when Sam came to me, his face weary, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could give him. He had been distant for days, avoiding me when we passed in the hallway, never meeting my gaze when we sat together at dinner. But tonight, he approached me with a quiet urgency, as if he couldn't keep the weight of the silence any longer. "I need to talk," he said, his voice low, filled with the same raw emotion I had heard before. "I need to explain." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied his face, his posture, the way he fidgeted with his hands as if he didn't know where to begin. The hesitation was palpable, but so was the sincerity in his eyes. I wanted to say something, to tell him that it was too late for words, that the damage was done. But instead I nodded, unsure of what else to do. Sam took a deep breath, and then he began to speak, slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I know what you saw that night," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know how it must have looked, and I know it hurt you. But I need you to understand, everything got out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to tell you the truth." He paused, glancing at the floor before continuing. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I never wanted to put you in the middle of all this. It was never supposed to be like this." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to yell at him, to demand answers, to scream about the pain I was feeling, the confusion that still gnawed at my insides. But another part of me, the part that still cared about him despite everything, wanted to hear him out, to understand where he was coming from. I wanted to know what had led him to make the choices he did, what had pushed him to keep secrets from me. I don't know what to say, Sam," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I don't know how to make sense of any of this." He looked up at me, his eyes full of regret, and for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of the Sam I had known, the friend, the confidant. But it didn't erase what had happened, didn't take away the sting of the betrayal. "I don't know how to make it right," Sam continued, his voice breaking. "But I want to try. I need you to know that all of this, it wasn't about you. It wasn't about hurting you. I didn't know how to deal with it. And now I've lost you." His words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of them pressing down on me. I had no answers, no easy solutions. All I had were more questions, more confusion. But one thing was clear, everything had changed, and I didn't know how to move forward from here. The silence between us stretched, uncomfortable and heavy, before I finally spoke again, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do with all of this, Sam. I don't know if I can just forget it. But I can't keep living in this in-between." The look in Sam's eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was sorry, but was sorry enough to fix things? Was it enough to rebuild the trust that had been broken? I wasn't sure. But in that moment, as he stood there, unsure of how to make things right, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't something that could be fixed with words alone. It was going to take time, and even then, I didn't know if the pieces would ever fit back together again. The days that followed were filled with a silence that stretched between us, fragile and uncertain. Sam tried, he really did, but the distance remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been irrevocably changed between us, and I didn't know how to get it back. The house that had once been a place of comfort now felt like a battleground, the walls closing in around me with every passing day. I wasn't sure how to move forward, how to process what had happened. But I knew that the journey, whatever it was going to be long, and full of things I wasn't ready to face. The atmosphere had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. Every day felt heavier, as if a storm was brewing in the pit of my stomach, threatening to spill over. My thoughts about Sam, our bond, and everything that had happened were all tangled, a mess I couldn't untangle no matter how much I tried. Each time I saw him, I couldn't help but feel this chasm growing between us, a gulf filled with unresolved questions and unspoken truths. I had tried to push past it, to go back to the way things were before, but it felt impossible. Every conversation felt strained, every laugh forced, every smile a mask. I couldn't keep up for much longer. I could see the effort in Sam's eyes too. He was trying to rebuild, but something was missing, and I didn't know if it was because of what had happened or because the foundation we had once built together had cracked beyond repair. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself standing in front of Sam, his face a mixture of hope and uncertainty, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't know what to say. My heart ached with the weight of it all. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice tight with frustration. "Sam," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "I need to know why." His expression faltered, and for a moment, I could see the hesitation in his eyes. But then it shifted, and he spoke. "I've been trying to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain myself without losing you completely." I felt a chill run through me. My mind raced, but I stayed silent, urging him to continue. I've been dealing with some things," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Things I never told you about. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth. The stuff I did, the choices I made, it's not who I am. Not really." I couldn't breathe. I had spent so much time wondering if what had happened was something personal between us, if it was something I had missed or done wrong. But this, what Sam was telling me, was beyond what I had ever imagined. The weight of his words crushed me. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was something darker, deeper. And I had no idea how to process it. "Tell me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Tell me everything." And so he did. Sam's confession spilled out in a rush of fragmented sentences, each one cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't just about the moments we'd shared or the betrayal I'd felt. No, it was about things he'd kept buried for years, secrets he'd never shared with anyone. He told me about a past filled with mistakes, things he'd done in desperation, in moments of weakness. He'd gotten involved with people and situations that were far from innocent, but he hadn't been able to pull away. His actions were a cry for help, something I couldn't have known without him opening up. It was hard to hear, even harder to accept. I felt a flood of emotions, betrayal, anger, confusion, crashing through me, threatening to overwhelm my ability to think. But amidst all the pain, something shifted in me. I realized that the Sam I had known, the Sam I thought I understood, was no longer there. The person standing before me was someone I didn't recognize. It felt like I was facing a stranger, someone who had worn a mask for so long that they had forgotten what they looked like beneath it. I could see how much guilt and shame weighed on him, how he regretted the choices he had made. But the truth was, the damage was done. And as much as I wanted to forgive him, to believe that there was something salvageable between us, I knew deep down that I couldn't. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I needed space. I needed to figure out who I was without the constant reminder of this painful reality. The decision to separate wasn't easy. As Sam begged me not to leave, I could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear of losing me forever. But I had already made up my mind. I needed to be alone to process everything. I needed time to heal. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I need to go." I turned away without looking back, leaving him standing there, lost in the fallout of his own actions. For days, I didn't know how to cope. I tried to move on, to regain a sense of normalcy, but the weight of it all lingered. I was constantly pulled between the desire to reach out to Sam and the overwhelming need to stay away. I couldn't let myself fall back into old patterns, no matter how much I missed the connection we once had. It was during this time, this period of solitude, that I began to reflect. I thought about everything that had led me to this point, the love, the betrayal, the confusion. I thought about who I was before all of this happened, and who I wanted to be moving forward. I was changing, and I wasn't sure if Sam had been the cause of that change or simply a byproduct of it. But either way, I knew I couldn't stay in the same place forever. I had to grow, even if it meant walking away from someone I once thought I couldn't live without. But then, as if the universe had other plans, something happened that made everything even more complicated. I received a message from Sam one night, a simple text that made my heart race. It was only a few words: "I need to talk."
It's important.
Something inside me told me this wasn't over yet. I stared at the message, the words blurring in front of my eyes.
I need to talk. It's important.
My heart skipped a beat, and a rush of conflicting emotions flooded through me. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to move on and leave it all behind. But another part, the part that was still tethered to Sam by invisible strings, felt a pull, an undeniable need to know what he wanted to say. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone in my hands feeling heavier with each passing second. The silence in the room seemed to stretch, suffocating, as I debated whether or not to respond. Was this just another ploy? Another attempt to draw me back into the tangled mess we'd created together? Or was it something different, something real? The words he had confessed still echoed in my mind, haunting me. But there was something about his message that made me feel like there was more to the story. Something he hadn't told me yet. I couldn't ignore the gnawing curiosity, the thought that maybe this time, this conversation could be the closure I desperately needed. I took a deep breath and typed a simple reply: "What's going on?" Almost immediately, the phone buzzed in my hand. Sam had responded, and his message came through with a speed that made my pulse quicken.
Can I come over? He asked.
Please, it's urgent. I hesitated for only a moment before I replied, okay? I didn't know what I was expecting. I hadn't seen him in days, and the idea of facing him again, after everything that had happened, made my stomach churn. But as much as I tried to convince myself to stay distant, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything again. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and my heart stopped. There he was, standing at my doorstep, his face drawn with worry and something else, something I couldn't place. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the door, and we locked eyes for a split second. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've already said everything." But Sam shook his head, his eyes pleading.
No, you don't understand. There's more.
I need to explain everything. You're not going to believe it, but I need you to listen. The urgency in his voice sent a chill down my spine. Something was wrong. This wasn't just another apology, another confession. This was something different. And in that moment, I knew I was standing on the edge of something that would change the course of everything I thought I knew. He stepped inside, his presence filling the space between us, and the door clicked shut behind him, sealing us in. The tension in the room was palpable, thickening with every second that passed. My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited for him to speak. But instead of diving into whatever it was he had come to say, Sam just stood there, his hands trembling at his sides. "You have to believe me," he whispered, his voice shaky.
There's someone else involved.
Someone I couldn't tell you about before, but I can't keep this from you anymore.
It's not just us.
It never was. The words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic, and a wave of dread washed over me. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying, but it didn't make sense.
What could he possibly mean? Someone else?
Who was he talking about? Sam took a deep breath, his gaze not meeting mine. "There's a danger."
A real one.
And I didn't want to drag you into it, but now I have no choice. My stomach twisted in knots, and I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, pulling me into something I wasn't prepared for.
What danger?
"Sam, you're not making any sense." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. Raw, unfiltered fear. His voice lowered to a near whisper as he spoke. "I don't know how to explain it, but they've been watching me. Watching us." The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. I didn't understand, couldn't make sense of what he was saying. Who was watching? And why? And most importantly, what did it have to do with me? Before I could ask another question, there was a knock at the door, sharp and insistent. Sam's face drained of color, his entire body stiffening. He looked at me with wide eyes, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. "Don't open that door," he whispered urgently. "Whatever you do, don't open it." My pulse raced as the knock came again, louder this time. Sam grabbed my wrist, his grip tight. "You have to trust me. We're not safe." The fear in his eyes was real. But so was the confusion that twisted inside me. I had no idea who was on the other side of that door, but I knew that whatever was happening, whatever Sam had just dragged me into, it was far worse than I could have ever imagined. And just as I took a step back, the doorbell rang again, followed by a faint, almost inaudible voice from the other side. "I know you're in there." The sound of that voice sent a chill up my spine. It wasn't just anyone. It wasn't a simple visitor or a friend. Whoever it was, they knew exactly where I was. And they knew exactly who I was with. I stood frozen, torn between the reality of the situation and the unknown that lay ahead. The tension was unbearable, and I had no idea what to do next. The door creaked open slightly on its own, the silence between us thick with the unknown. Sam was now breathing heavily, his eyes never leaving the door. "Whatever happens next, don't say a word." And with that, everything went dark.